It's fascinating this whole Ukraine debacle has melted the brains of leftists who are generally quite nuanced and realistic about things. Why do you think that is? I think a lot of it is just comes down to like this classic thing of like you support Putin, and people just don't want to be lumped into that. And you can point out a lot of problematic things about how Russia is currently constituted and Putin himself. But when you try and have this thing, you try to be sure before you say one word, demonstrate to everyone your disgust and contempt for this person. You kind of just end up you lose the plot, and your whole argument just kind of falls apart. And I think that's a big part of what it is. Like people just like it's that classic thing. It's like, oh, you support Saddam, you support Putin, you support Assad. It's the same thing every single time in one of these situations, and I think that really trips people up. Putin bad. I think that's a big part of it. And that's why I was trying to watch those clips and show those clips to you yesterday of Kwame Ture with that quote about Saddam himself, talking about like when George Bush started the war in Iraq, I went to Saddam and said, I'm with you. Right? When Kwame Ture says that, his argument isn't, I like Saddam Hussein and think he's good and cool. He's simply saying that there's no bad guy, according to the United States, that's going to scare me off of unequivocally denouncing Western imperialism and American imperialism. It doesn't, even if it's the devil himself. That's the whole point of that quote, right? Even if it's Satan himself, I don't care. I think that's the opinion we need to have. None of this to say that Putin is good. You know, we shouldn't think that. That's not the point though. That's not the point to having these discussions. And I think people just get really tripped up being called a Putin apologist or a Russian propagandist or whatever. People are just so allergic to being like labeled like this. That they end up having this kind of like very squishy analysis, or they end up kind of like backtracking, or like I was saying, even people that had good takes about this kind of stuff originally, everyone gets mad at them. Everyone calls them a Putin apologist or a Russian propagandist or whatever, and then they immediately kind of backtrack. I think that's a big part of what it is. It's so cool that Joe Biden, president of the entire United States, has no power to do anything at all. This is a great point. Boy, am I glued. But Putin is a dark, omnipotent sorcerer who can bend the world to his will. Honestly, boy, am I glued. The sort of liberal, anti-Russia establishment that has really like picked up in intensity over the last 5 years, like since the Trump era, no one does better PR for Putin and Russia than these people, who paint Putin as if he's some kind of all-powerful puppet master, chess grandmaster who controls the strings of fucking all geopolitical affairs. No one does better Russian propaganda than these liberals who constantly talk about this and are so terrified by this guy. It's amazing. They'll call someone like me a Russian propagandist. No one does better Russian propaganda than these people that are like repeating this idea about Putin that he's some all-powerful puppet master. Another example of why you can never trust the fucking Green Party. Yeah, this is a good point, Red Scary. You had a good point about that in the Discord too. About that's the German Green Party for you now, or just like let's not explore nuclear power in any way. Let's definitely cut off support for the Nord Stream pipeline to get natural gas from Russia, our closest neighbor. Instead, we'll buy fracked gas from the United States, the most fucking pollution-heavy, carbon-heavy type of gas we can possibly purchase. Great. You can't take a defensive stance because they keep making leader hyper-focused, i.e. Assad, Saddam, Gaddafi, now Putin and Xi. Yeah, that's what I mean Afro-socialista. That's why I just don't bother with this. I don't bother trying to equivocate or both sides, but two things can be bad. You know, we get to a lot of that kind of stuff. And like we've said time and time again, this was true during the time of the Soviet Union. It's true today in the new Cold War, whether it comes to China, whether it comes to Russia, when people say neither Beijing nor Moscow. That argument, that's the nuanced, like, social democrat take on these foreign policy issues. Neither Washington nor Moscow, or neither Washington nor Beijing. When you live in the West, especially in America, but if you live in the West and you take this stance, neither Washington nor Moscow, what that means is, in practice, is Washington. That's what that means when you live in the West. It's a non-opinion. It doesn't mean anything. People say that because then they say, like, I'm the superior. I've got the nuanced take and the nuanced views. And I don't support dictators, nor do I support the West. I'm anti-imperialist, and I'm against Western imperialism, and I'm against Russian imperialism. Or I'm against Chinese imperialism, too. And they have this kind of smug satisfaction about this. But it's like, you do, like, I'm sorry, but that doesn't actually resolve anything. That does not resolve anything. I don't know why you'd think Russian soldiers aren't Nazis. Well, listen, there's Nazis in the Russian military, I'm sure, in Russian society. There's certainly Nazis in the Canadian military. There's quite definitely Nazis in the American military. I think the difference is it's actually not, like, encouraged. And when these things, even in Russia, even in scary Russia, even in scary Russia, when they find this out, it's generally discouraged to be a Nazi in the actual military. Whereas in Ukraine, there are no neo-Nazi militias that are, like, part of the military establishment. That's the key difference, I think. Like, they know that these battalions are neo-Nazis. They think that it's cool. They like it. And they openly encourage that. And Canada and the United States send these neo-Nazi battalions funds and arms, and we train them, and we say, we support this. We support this whole movement. Again, don't get it twisted, folks. When we have these conversations, none of this is to say that, like, Russia is great or perfect, or Putin is a based leader. Putin, literally a capitalist, anti-communist oligarch, as he made clear in his speech yesterday when he outlined the historical context of all this, when he took a lot of shots at our boy, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, Lenin. Talking about the mistakes that Lenin made and the mistakes that the Bolsheviks made, trying to give national self-determination to places like Ukraine, which he views as this big historical error. None of this is to say that, like, yeah, Russia's great. I don't know how I can make this more clear to people. I don't know how I can make it more clear to people that that's not what it's about. My point is that it doesn't matter what is going on in Russia. For me, this is just for me. You don't have to agree. I think you should agree. For me, though, when you see Western imperialists lining up on one side of any conflict, in this case, America, Canada, Britain, NATO, they're all lined up on the Ukraine side. As Kwame Ture tells us, when you see that happening, what you need to do is go support the other side. Whatever the enemy supports, you must oppose. Whatever the enemy opposes, you must support. Just the basic lesson, the basic understanding. And again, even if you want to say Russia bad, Putin bad, fine, say that. The reality is, though, when it comes to this, like, Russian-Ukraine crisis, or the recognition of these breakaway republics as being independent, if you're living in fucking Canada, the United States, I'm sorry, but the baseline opinion for the left, even if you can't bring yourself to be like NATO bad, Ukraine bad, I don't want to support any of this, the baseline stance other than that is not my business, not my problem. What's so hard about that? What does it have to do with us? Why should Canada or the United States intervene with sanctions or intervene militarily over this, like, what amounts to a civil war? This is not some situation where Russia is picking on the poor, innocent citizens of Ukraine. This is a civil war. Again, we can look at that map by our man, John Mearsheimer, who showed this map in his detailed presentation about this, which I recommend everyone takes a look at, because it very clearly outlines the roots of this whole crisis. Take a look at the map. You see how divided Ukraine is. That's a civil war. That has nothing to do with me. That has nothing to do with us. I'm going to need you to preface every sentence with Putin bad. I mean, it seems like people do actually think that. This is the problem, right? Or get a tattoo of Putin bad. You can point to before every sentence. I just put it on the screen. I'll put it on the screen in flashing black and white letters, just so everyone understands that I'm clear about this. Just so everyone can understand that I'm clear about this. Just so no one gets this twisted. Again, folks, though, this is what it boils down to. Okay? This is what it boils down to. What the root of this crisis is a civil war. It's not about Russian aggression, as much as people in the Western media would like to tell you about this. And endlessly talk about how evil, devious Putin is behind all these things. Look, here's the ethnic breakdown of Ukraine. And again, this is shared not by a tanky leftist, John Mearsheimer. This guy is a fucking neocon. He's like a psycho, this guy. But he's correct when he talks about the roots of this conflict. I like Mearsheimer because he's honest. He's an honest imperialist, okay? And I appreciate that. And in this breakdown of the conflict, which I encourage everyone to watch. We already watched this before, so we're not going to spend the whole 2 hours watching this again. I encourage everyone to watch John Mearsheimer's breakdown of this. It's very, very historically accurate and accurate in terms of what the geopolitical situation is. Highly recommend that anyone check that out. And this map is what this is about. Okay? This map should clear up any confusion about this. This is a civil war. It is a civil war between a poorly divided former province of the Soviet Union, which many people in the East, as you can clearly see, want nothing to do with, including there's Crimea. See that brown part? Ethnic Russian majority. That brown part there, where evil, devious Putin annexed annexed Crimea. Ooh, oh no. How scary. He annexed this place that's historically been a part of Russia for hundreds and hundreds of years, with a majority ethnic Russian majority population. And then you have these eastern Ukraine states, which is still a significant ethnic Russian population, still a majority. Okay? This has nothing to do with the US. This has nothing to do with Canada. This is between the people that live in this region here and the people that live in this region here. And for the last 10 years, we've had Canada and the United States pumping arms and funds and training militias in this region to bomb and attack the people that live in this region that want nothing to do with them. That's what we've been doing for 10 years now. So we've played we, the West, America, Canada, NATO, the Western powers. You know, it's the fucking global criminal cartel that the United States is the head of the snake, as I was pointing out. We have been exacerbating this conflict from minute one, and that's only going back to 2014. All of this can be traced back, including everything that's going wrong with Russia, everything that's going on with Ukraine, can be traced back to the fall of the Soviet Union, which is also something that didn't just happen in a vacuum. It didn't just happen. It wasn't this thing that just happened for no reason, or because communism bad, or because the Soviets mismanaged it. This was something that was done to this region. We deliberately contributed to that. The West spent decades and decades and hundreds of billions of dollars ensuring that that was what was going to be the outcome. And everything can be traced back to that moment, the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s. That's why you have Putin today. That's why you have Russia being ruled by corrupt oligarchs today. That's why you have this fascist NATO-aligned movement in Ukraine. It all goes back to that. That's our responsibility. That is our responsibility, that we've contributed to that. What's the Hunter Biden connection? Well, I think the Hunter Biden connection is that he was given some cushy job for some kind of Ukrainian gas company, despite having no experience in that industry, precisely because of his political connections. And is completely just has a total like nepotism job. That's the whole reason he got some like high paid salary on the board of some energy company, precisely because of who he had access to, because of his family. Six-figure no-show gig. Yeah, little kickback from funding the Nazis. And then, of course, you have these liberals bending over backwards to excuse that, which is obviously corruption. It's fucking clear corruption, clear as day. But because Orange Man bad, they had to defend it, obviously. Yeah, some narcs, when it came to Vladimir Putin, some narcs on Twitter pointed out that it's technically the French spelling. I choose to disbelieve it. Cope and a lie. Couldn't agree more. Red scary. Not even talking about how the abject poverty Ukraine faces is also our fault for illegally dismantling the Soviet Union and then pillaging every public asset. That's what I mean. Everything can be traced back to that. I mean, we can start the origin of this conflict in 2014, or we can go back to the early 90s and the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is our responsibility, the West. Not to say that, again, it's the same kind of thing. Not to say that everything that happened in the Soviet Union was perfect, or that was perfectly managed, or there wasn't corruption, or there wasn't problems. Overall, though, we can't just say that that was a failure of communism when the West literally spent hundreds of billions of dollars and decades and decades and decades fighting a Cold War to ensure that that was going to be the outcome. Right? So we own that. And what we're seeing now is a result in Ukraine, which is a civil war. It's a civil war. It has nothing, and it has something to do with us in that we helped cause it. But that doesn't mean that we have some responsibility to do. We have to do something. We have to do something about this. We got to send in troops. We got to send in arms and funding. No, we do not. No, we do not. Fucking Khrushchev. Who has been saved by America? It's a great question. You're fired up today. I like it. Well, because I had dipshits in my Twitter mentions trying to be like, oh, Rob said there was going to be no invasion of Ukraine, and here's the invasion. He's not even saying anything about it. Blah, blah, blah. Putin supporter, Putin apologist, Russian propagandist, all this shit. And it's fucking annoying, frankly. My Twitter Mensheviks, who I would love to purge from my following list. When you invite people into your house and then they show up, that's called an invasion. I think it's also quite telling about how people in the West don't really have much of an understanding for people in the other parts of the world, don't really pledge their allegiance to an arbitrarily drawn line, nation state, or an empire. It's mostly about their linguistic connection, which reflects into their shared culture and tradition, which brings them together in times of chaos. This is why the Crimeans chose Russian over staying in a tumultuous puppet state like Ukraine. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Raul. So I had a thought that maybe this is Biden's big plan for unity. COVID crisis didn't bring us together, but maybe he's hoping war will. That's certainly a part of it. Yeah. But I mean, I think this stuff was going to be happening regardless of what was going on with Biden's poll numbers or their failure to pass an agenda. It's certainly something that they're going to lean on, considering they can't run on we passed an agenda that helped people, because since they did not do that. So they're certainly going to lean on it, but I think this would have happened regardless, because this is not, when it comes to like the national security establishment of the United States, as we all know, it's not the president pulling the strings. It's the national security establishment and their partners in the defense contractors. They're the ones pulling the strings. They give the president the basic idea, what's up, and then maybe the president gives it a little personal shine or a little personal direction, pushes it in one direction or one other direction. Overall, though, these are completely bipartisan now. So this would be going on regardless if Trump was still president, regardless of what was happening. Who benefits? And as we see, these people are benefiting. These people absolutely are benefiting. As always, by design. For sure, definitely doesn't give him any incentive to try and dial back the bullshit. Absolutely, Buck Dragon. And to be clear, also, like, Biden did try to say a couple weeks ago, we covered this on the show, a couple of weeks ago, Biden was like, well, if there's just a few, Biden laid out this exact situation a couple weeks ago. And was like, well, if there's just a minor incursion, that doesn't mean we need to respond with like military or all these kind of sanctions and stuff. And everyone got super mad. Everyone got so mad at him. People in the media were freaking the fuck out that he was being weak, and he was being weak on Putin and stuff, weak on Russia. Everyone got super mad. So he was like, oh, but Jack, we got to do the sanctions. Yeah, and Duttmeister, very good point. It's also important to note that the Western idea of Ukraine is from the nationalist diaspora. The average Ukrainian is tired of the situation and just want peace and economic development. I mean, it goes back to that fucking deranged quote we saw a few weeks ago from Michael Ignatieff's book when he describes meeting Chrystia Freeland. And she talks about this like Ukrainian nationalistic project, where, as you're pointing out, the idea of Ukraine as we understand it is completely painted by these non-Ukrainian people people that don't live in Ukraine, but Ukrainian nationalists that live in Canada and live elsewhere. They view the people in Ukraine as being like in their way because they're not really that interested in this like grand fascist-oriented nationalistic project. A lot of these people are like just kind of want to go about their lives and live as normal, and they want to like turn Ukraine into the idea that they've had as expatriates now for years, including Chrystia Freeland's grandfather, who was a Nazi. Let me see if I can find that, because that was absolutely deranged. Yeah, here we go. Dan Beckner shared this, and Dan Beckner is a wonderful artist and a invaluable resource when it comes to this. Because he's actually, of course, unlike many of the journalists that spend their time talking about this, has actually hung out in these regions and actually spoken to people that live there. This is from Michael Ignatieff's Blood and Belonging. So Ignatieff says, at the Apollon, I met Chrystia Freeland, who writes for the Financial Times and The Economist in Kyiv. She's a Canadian-Ukrainian from a farming family in the Peace River country of northern Alberta. Just a simple, humble farming family. What else has her family been into? We don't need to look into that. Don't need to look into that. Don't worry about it. One of thousands of those second-generation Ukrainian Canadians who were raised to dream about an independent Ukraine by their exiled parents. Why were they exiled? Again, we don't need to look into it. And now have come back to live and work in the reality of independence. It is common, she says, this is the important part. It is common, she says, for Canadian Ukrainians to think of themselves as the true Ukrainians, the ones who kept the faith, while among the actual Ukrainians, the compulsion and fatalism of the communist system was working its way into their bones. The Ukrainian Canadians return home expecting a fervently nationalistic and religious people and find instead phlegmatic, ironic, sober, and fatalistic Soviet souls. Independence requires a new human type, but she says, with an equal measure of affection and irritation, it will be a long time coming. This is exactly what Chrystia Freeland, her whole life's work has been devoted to. Has been devoted to fostering this exact type of fervently nationalist Ukrainian population. Nothing wrong with the old human type. I agree. I couldn't agree more. But I think this is like a good way of understanding this. And who will be PM one day. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Chrystia Freeland and what's the conservative guy's name? I already forgot his name. The really dorky conservative guy. Pierre why do I can't remember his name? Please someone tell me so I stop humiliating myself. White Urkel is a good way of putting it. Pierre Poilievre, thank you. Jesus. My brain is just melting. So Rose's opinion is that these eastern regions of Ukraine would be happy to become part of Russia, and thus we have no responsibility to intervene on their behalf in any way. Is that more or less correct? I mean, don't talk to me. Ask them. Why don't you ask them what they think? My general position is that this is a civil war within Ukraine that has nothing to do with us. We don't know. We don't need to intervene on any one side, and we have been intervening and causing the conflict in the first place. I would rather let those people decide for themselves what they want to do. I don't think it has anything to do with me. It certainly doesn't have enough to do with me that I should say, yes, we need to keep arming and funding the Ukrainian government to ensure that these breakaway republics never leave Ukraine. What the fuck does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with Canada or the United States? No. I'm so wrapped up in this. I'm so wrapped up in this Ukrainian nationalistic project. We can never allow these breakaway republics to be independent. No, they must stay part of Ukraine. What the fuck? Who cares? Let them figure it out. Let them decide what they want to do. I wish other countries would intervene here. I agree. Let's worry about that. Let's worry about getting countries to intervene in our own fucking fake democracies. How about that? Here we go. Just in case no one gets... I don't want anyone to get confused. Look, here we go. Look at that. Just shut down... I'm going to shut down all the criticism. Just so there's no confusion about this. We wouldn't want anyone to accuse me of being a Russian propagandist or spreading disinformatia. With regard to Western intervention, it's useless to determine whether intervention is the right thing to do if you're doing it for the right reasons, because there's no record of the West intervening anywhere ever for the right reasons. Why don't people get this, G. Kleppy? Why don't people understand this? there's zero circumstances where the West intervening further, because when you say it like we're just going to start doing it now, kind of whitewashes the fact that we have been intervening for the last 10 years or longer, no matter, depending on when you want to start counting from. There is no situation where Western intervention is going to improve this situation. There's zero like circumstances where further Western intervention is going to improve the situation in this region. I don't get how liberal Americans can rightfully complain that a small minority of right-wing radicals are trying to overrule a dissenting majority, then turn around and demand Eastern Ukrainians live that exact scenario. Sometimes, June Song, it feels a little bit like these people are a little bit hypocritical, if you ask me. I don't know if that's taking it too far. Sometimes I think these firm beliefs and values aren't quite as ironclad as some of these people make it out to be. I'm literally just trying to ask honest questions. Appreciate y'all's input. I agree with everything said so far. Okay, well, thank you, Gator Galen. I appreciate that. You never know, because I do have a lot of people coming to yell at me about this, so you understand why we're maybe we're a little on edge right now. We got hair triggers. We got hair triggers on the flame gun, I guess, because many people have been like yelling about this, and I've seen there's been brigading of other streamers. I guess maybe I'm not big enough or influential enough to get on the radar to get people brigading us en masse to start yelling at us, but maybe one day we'll get to that point. I have my gun set to roast. We're on yellow alert here. That's right. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this. I talk to the people I work with about politics all the time. Everyone there is just like, why is Ukraine any of our business? It's a great question. It's a great question. You do MasterChef recaps. The people stand ready to defend the friendship triangle. That's right. In front, like, to be honest, I am kind of hoping that we do. I have kind of a sick impulse to have some of these folks join us. Some of our pro-NATO friends. But here's another thing, though.
Tommy, tell us how you put the skits together.
We don't do skits, Mom. Skits are when the football players dress up as the cheerleaders and think it's wit. Sketches are when some of the best minds in comedy come together and put on a national television show that's watched and talked about by millions of people.
Don't you talk to your mother like that.
I'm trying to tell you, you're standing in the middle of the Paris Opera House of American television.
Well, that's swell, Tom, but your little brother is standing in the middle of Afghanistan.
So that really says it all right there. I'm sorry. It's at some point. I'm gonna X out. I'm gonna close it. Okay, it's closed. Consider it closed. Consider it closed. All right. Eventually, I will stop finding that funny. Eventually, I will stop finding it funny. Okay, just maybe not today. Today is not that day. That's swell, Tom. But your little brother's standing in the middle of Afghanistan. Rob would do well to pull Hassan and take back his earlier take that Sorkin is good. Maybe he should move. That's right. I simply wouldn't volunteer to go to Afghanistan if I didn't want to have it to be a big problem. Sounds like a him problem. That's right. And no, I do love our boy Aaron Sorkin. I have a love-hate relationship with Sorkin. I literally think he's had a terrible effect on our culture. Unironically. At the same time, I still kind of enjoy his work. And I highly recommend people watch Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. It's so entertaining. Is China going to recognize these republics? It'd be a Chad move. Well, everything that China is saying right now is like they didn't denounce. I think that's the big thing. Because China, this goes along with like what their modern foreign policy is. They don't want to intervene. They don't want to intervene in in these kind of situations, even though I think some of us might like that. He broke up with Chenoweth, and you got Deck the Hall, so it's peaks and valleys. And yeah, every single like blonde female character that he ended up writing about is some kind of like avatar, Chenoweth avatar throughout the rest of his work. So yeah, I think that's the thing. China's current foreign policy is really like non-intervene. They want cooler heads to prevail. I think it is like important to note that they didn't denounce this. I think people want China to be more interventionist, and I understand this impulse. But I don't think they're quite ready yet. I don't think they're quite there yet. They want to continue building their productive forces to get to a point where they can start doing that. Maybe if that day comes, maybe that's copium for me. I don't know. But I would say though that I don't think it's a coincidence that Putin met President Xi over the course of the Olympics when they solidified this partnership, which is meant to counter this kind of imperialist hegemony. I don't think it's a coincidence that shortly after this, Putin did make this move to recognize these republics. I would be very surprised if Xi wasn't totally aware that this was on the way, this move. I'm sure that he was aware of it. China also gave Ukraine weapons, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I mean, it goes along with China's policy. They sell to everybody. They sell to even a lot of the bad guys that we don't like. They sell to Israel. I believe they sell to Saudi Arabia as well. They don't pick sides in these conflicts. They sell to whoever's buying, you know? It is what it is. That's the thing. I think I would personally would like them to be more openly to support these socialist movements, to stop supporting these like terrible places like Saudi Arabia and Israel. I do kind of understand the logic to it. It makes me a little uncomfortable, but I do think that there's kind of like, this is part of their overall strategy of building themselves up to this global hegemon level, which I'm hoping, and again, maybe this is cope. I'm hoping that eventually when they get to this point, they'll start to take these more principled foreign policy stances. Yeah, of course they're not above criticism. It's just most people's criticisms of them are stupid, actually. This is kind of the main problem. And it forces you to defend them because of how ridiculous and how outrageous the propaganda is. Mark Ames on TrueAnon was talking about how long the Russia-China relationship has been developing. They definitely knew. Yeah, I would be shocked. I would be shocked if this was some like surprising move that President Xi was not aware of, that the Chinese government was not aware of. But don't you think it's about time for them to stop selling weapons to fascists? Yeah, I personally do. Yes. You know, they also sell a lot of stuff to the United States of America as well. Right? Which is like the worst human rights violator in the world. That's kind of their whole strategy, is to develop these economic ties with everybody. You know, you don't have to like it, but I do understand kind of the logic behind some of these decisions. This map is interesting because yesterday I drew a map labeling all the cities in Ukraine that had Soviet and current missile tank ship manufacturing industries, and it basically aligns from around the Kharkiv in the northeast down to Odessa in the southwest. Everything to the southeast of that line contains 95% of defense production. And now I can see that this map mirrors mine in that the same area is either Russian-speaking or ethnic Russian. Interesting coincidence. I can see why Russia sees this as strategic, etc., as well as creating a buffer to potential future NATO Ukraine. Yeah, I think there's strong arguments to be made about why this part of Ukraine, there's a legitimate claim on the part of the people that live there to not want to have anything to do with the country. It would be folly to pretend that it's not of strategic interest as well to Russia. But like we were pointing out earlier, these places declared independence in 2014. It's been 10 years of fighting, basically. And they're only now saying, like, okay, fine, we recognize them as independent. Because there's been no diplomatic solution, because the violence is only increasing, especially over the last couple of weeks and months. The Ukrainian military has stepped up their efforts to, like, shell and attack these people that live there. Many civilians have been killed. And so it's like, 10 years later, after this conflict has only been escalating, despite any possible diplomatic efforts at a solution, they're saying, like, okay, we recognize these places as independent, and we're going to send in peacekeepers to stop the fighting. So I think that's very legitimate, but it's also we should be able to recognize that it is of strategic value as well. Hey, Ms. Squatch, what's up? I don't think Russia will annex those new republics, though. They might think it would be going too far. Yeah, I mean, maybe like that's something that people would justify the freakout that's going on right now, right? There's a strong claim. They would have a claim to do that. I don't know if I would agree with it, but they would at least have a claim to say, like, okay, we're claiming these republics. That's not what he's doing. Maybe they're setting themselves up to go down that path. Also, why does every article not mention the 4 or 5 days of constant shelling in these regions by Ukraine, killing civilians and blowing up rail lines and kindergartens? It's a good question. Why is that? We would recognize the validity of building self-defensive institutions in black majority areas if the U.S. were to integrate white nationalists into their National Guard openly rather than covertly. I would recognize that right now. I think people in those communities are well within their rights. When you look at the fucking constant state violence coming from the police officers and the police force, the security forces, and the fact that we know there's many extremists and fascists and white nationalists that are part of that, part of these institutions, I think they'd be well within their rights to do that right now. I mean, how many people did the cops kill last year in the United States? Like over 1,000. One of the highest years for police killings last year. I would absolutely recognize the right of these communities to organize in self-defense of this. None of these people had a problem with breakaway states when it comes to Kosovo. It's only a problem now because they lean away from the West. Well, that's what I mean. That's the hypocrisy here, is that these people unequivocally support these efforts of national self-determination when it's coming from like extremist minorities in official state enemies of the United States. Then they support these things. Then we have to always listen to what these dissidents are saying. And we need to arm and fund them and set up NGOs funded by the West and do all this destabilization efforts to ensure that these people have their democratic freedoms respected. But when you have this kind of clear-cut case of the majority of people in this region that are like, yeah, we want national self-determination as well, all of a sudden it's like, well, Putin bad, so no thank you. No. You know, it's extremely hypocritical. Thanks for the video about green capitalism, but it's kind of off topic for what we're talking about. So maybe another day I can take a look at that. I like Bez on Twitter. Should we take a look at this clip and talk about the Minsk agreement? Should we do that? Like maybe we can, there's this video from Al Jazeera. It's like 20 minutes long. We can take a look at this piece and try to understand what the Minsk agreement is, why it has not worked as a diplomatic solution, and try to understand if we can wrap our minds further around like where, what the motivations are of all the various actors as part of this conflict. Yeah, I did see I wish we had watched that Carl Job Malcolm X video yesterday, actually, Old Dutch, because we've been talking about Malcolm X. It was Malcolm X's death anniversary, the anniversary of his assassination. I would like to see that, though, because it's really interesting. So here's this video. It's from Al Jazeera. Again, I don't know how... Okay, wait, this is Biden speaking right now. Let's take a look at Joe, and then we'll look at Minsk after. Or I guess he hasn't started yet. Biden's going to speak soon. Maybe we should just hang on for that. And we can take a look at the Minsk agreement afterwards. Biden's got to finish his ice cream real quick. This is interesting, though. Okay, here I wanted to go back to this because you remember what was it that Biden said a few weeks ago? What was it that Joe Biden said a few weeks ago about the Nord Stream pipeline? What was that? Here's what Joe Biden said about the Nord Stream pipeline a few weeks ago. And I found this very interesting.
Let me answer this first.
In this context, with what the news broke last night about how Nord Stream now is getting paused. And Germany is saying, no, because of this new escalation, we have to pause this pipeline. And remember back to what Joe Biden said just a few weeks ago. Also remember that Germany is still technically being occupied militarily by the United States. Look at his little smile. Look at Joe's little smile.
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Turns out there was something to that. Right? And by the way, when you talk about imperialism, that's imperialism. When the United States controls whether Germany goes through with this pipeline or not, that's imperialism. And you're controlling these economic systems. You're controlling these political systems in other countries where you don't actually technically have sovereignty. And now Germany, just like Australia shot themselves in the foot over China against their closest neighbor, now you have Germany kowtowing to the US. They're pausing the pipeline as well, which is only going to fuck people in Germany. It's going to raise energy costs in Germany. And they're going to be forced to buy American fracked gas. They're going to be forced to buy fracked gas from the United States for probably a higher price. It's going to absolutely screw people that live in Germany. 38% of Germany's energy. Like, I was surprised by this. I thought because of this, because of the Nord Stream pipeline, I thought Germany was not going to take this stance. If you wanted me to do an actual mea culpa, admit where I was wrong about something, I thought because of this pipeline and because like what Russia is doing right now is not this like catastrophic, cataclysmic invasion that people have been warning about, I assumed that Germany would be pursuing this project still. But I must admit, I was taken aback when I did see this. Which is, again, is going to be a big problem for people in Germany, and in terms of their like energy prices that they're going to having to be paying. Although I will say though that like the pipeline is still built. The pipeline's built. It was finished in September. So it's not like it's just going away forever, but I think this was a interesting move, which as soon as I saw this news drop, I thought of that Biden clip when he said like, oh yeah, if they invade, there's going to be no Nord Stream. What leverage did the U.S. have to make Germany fuck off there? It's America. That's imperialism. Imperialism, as much as like some people would like to say, who've been weighing in on this, as much as some people like to say it's when one country invades another country, that's not what imperialism means. It's got an actual definition. As our boy said, it's the highest stage of capitalism. It's control over information. It's control over financial systems. And Germany never stopped being occupied. They're still literally occupied by the United States. It's already built and filled with technical gas so that it can be switched on and operational at any time. So that's the thing. As even though they made this announcement, I would still be interested to see where this goes. It's not like they're just going to fucking never use it. It's literally built. They control the international monetary system. That is imperialism. And other countries that are trying to make alliances to counteract that, to counteract America's control over these financial systems, over the flow of information, that's not them also doing imperialism. That's a brain dead analysis. Germany already has the highest electrical prices in Europe, and also the USA can't even satisfy their own demand with their production. The frackers are in a financial bubble too. Yeah, well, and that goes to show, like when you're exporting tons of gas, it doesn't necessarily like help people in your own country, as much as we see in Canada. You know, it's not like these oil pipelines that are built in Canada are done to benefit people in Canada, in this country, or benefit the communities that they're rolling through. It's literally to flow offshore and sell to other foreign countries. That's the whole reason that we do this. Is it true Germany was backing Russia in this because of the pipeline, or did I misunderstand that? Well, it's not that they were backing Russia, but they were taking a much more sort of nuanced and less aggressive tone because of this connection that they have. Because of this pipeline that they've built with Russia, because Russia's the source of natural gas for like a huge majority of Europe. They're being much more cautious. They weren't being like, yeah, we're going to sanction Russia and we're going to bomb Russia. And they weren't taking this very like aggressive stance that the US was doing. They were kind of trying to display some caution. But now that the chips are on the table, they do seem to be taking the US's side. I mean, that's part of the whole Syria operation. That's what that was about as well, right? It was building a pipeline. They wanted to build a pipeline through Syria to counteract the ability for Russia to sell their natural gas. That's a lot of what all these geopolitical conflicts come down to. That's what it is. The latest Lukashenko versus reporter clip.
The brilliant answer of Belarusian president.
Будем отсюда нападать на Украину, или у вас уже, извините по-народному скажу, этот бздык прошел?
So it's not about what I believe, it's about what the United States says.
Это ваша официальная позиция вашего правительства. А это официальные действия Беларуси и России. Ну а вообще, вы что здесь делаете за тысячи километров? Ну, допустим, в Украине специалисты ваши, в Польше ваши войска, в Литве, Латвии, Эстонии. Что вам делать здесь? за тысячи километров. Поэтому нас упрекать в этом не надо. В Канаде и Мексике наших вооруженных сил нет. Поэтому успокойтесь. Вы обвиняли Россию и Беларусь, что мы вторгнемся вчера. Вторгнемся в Украину. Не вторглись. Значит, ваша разведка и миллиарды долларов, которые вы тратите, никчемные. Признайте хотя бы это.
He's a problematic fave, folks. What can we say? He's a problematic fave, this guy. Sometimes you do have to hand it to him. I don't want to read subtitles, but I get these foreigners just learn American. I know, comrade, social distancing. So is there anything else? We're waiting for Biden to speak. I don't know if there's any other updates. The Cuervo Gold. The fine Colombian. Make tonight a wonderful thing. Red Scary dropping some important knowledge in the chat here as well. More about liquefied natural gas, the technology that has created commodity natural gas. Learned all this from the one Radio War Nerd ep, truly one of the best pods out there. Apparently there was a dude with a gun in the Rito Center. Oh, good. Cool. Very cool. So I'm wondering, I don't want to start this this video about the Minsk agreement and then have to turn it off because Biden's there. When is this old motherfucker going to talk here? Yeah, they're popping him. They're changing the diaper, popping him full of the cocktail, the amphetamine cocktail that they get into whenever they want to trot him out there. This is pretty scary. Brief Ottawa update. Considering everything that's been going on in Ottawa right now, it's a little alarming.
So again, we're outside the Rito Center right now. This is outside H&M on Rito Street. There are officers across the street with their guns drawn. Witnesses that we've been talking to outside say that they were reports of a man with a gun on the second floor. Again, police have not confirmed what is happening right now. Just multiple witnesses have said inside the store power was cut to the entire mall and that someone was screaming inside that there was a man with a gun. So police, again, outside H&M with their guns drawn. We continue to monitor the situation.
Scary. He wandered onto the roof. That's what they're all doing up there. Old Grandpa Joe is wandering out there again. It's the oaf insurgency. That's right. It was the oaf occupation. Now it's oaf Gladio. We got oaf Gladio going on down. Wonderful. I'm wondering what to do. I guess we should just watch this video about the Minsk agreement. Who knows when this is going to start? We'll watch this video so we can understand a little bit more of the context of what has been going on and so we can understand a little bit more what Russia's motivation is to recognize these republics like I said, it's Al Jazeera. I'm not expecting to be like a whitewashed pro-Western, pro-NATO version of the events. You never know, considering the way that Al Jazeera is funded by this kind of Gulf state oil money, whether that's going to have some impact. Who knows? But interested to see. I mean, usually they're fairly even-handed on this. And Squatch, this is just terrifying, this whole story. There was that shooting in Portland, an anti-police violence protest, was several blocks away but could hear the gunshots and sirens. Police won't reveal who the shooter was. They confiscated footage of the event. The shooter is probably a right-wing nut, but could be linked to the police somehow, which is why they've been dodgy about revealing who they are. Yeah, isn't he like a Nazi? He's like literally a Nazi furry who follows like Andy No and follows Andy No's YouTube page. Andy No, the fucking fascist propagandist that's still verified by Twitter and still taken seriously by the media. Sick. Just a sick person. I fucking hate that guy. And I'll remind, it's difficult for me to talk about Andy No. But when Andy No got attacked with that milkshake, remember the concrete milkshake? He got hit with a milkshake that had concrete in it. It gave him permanent brain damage. Remember that? And on Twitter, I made fun of this for this obviously fake bullshit, and immediately had people DMing me anonymously to threaten the life of my son. Immediately, within minutes. Making specific threats about my son, who I had posted a picture of a few days before. Within minutes of making fun of Andy No, I had people sending me anonymous messages about this. Fucking, that's how I feel about Andy No and the people that follow him. And can't talk about what I would personally do if I ever did encounter that particular individual, because the words that I have to say about that would run contrary to the terms of service on twitch.tv. And we wouldn't want that. We wouldn't have any consequences for the stream to talk about what I would personally do in that situation if I were to ever encounter this individual. So let's just not do that. Let's watch this clip about the Minsk agreements. I'll keep my eye on this Russia thing, and we'll see if we have to take a pause to look at what good old Joey Biden is saying about this, Grandpa Joe. In the meantime, we'll watch this video from Al Jazeera on the Minsk agreement. What is it? Why do we should understand what it is? And it's hopefully going to provide us some context, important context about this conflict.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account,
which will help us understand.
Don't harm Bear Paw Eater, or Uncle Dimitri will eat you.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, here's this video from Al Jazeera.
They were supposed to stop conflict in eastern Ukraine, but the Minsk agreements have been repeatedly violated since 2015. With the threat of a Russian invasion, can the accord still provide a path to peace? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Political leaders and diplomats say they're working hard to prevent a Russian invasion of Ukraine. The so-called Minsk agreements keep coming up in their discussions. They were signed in Belarus to try and secure a ceasefire between Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine. The first version in 2014 failed to take hold, so a second accord, called Minsk II, was signed the following year. But both sides accuse each other of breaking the agreement. At least 14,000 people have been killed in fighting during the past 8 years. Monitors from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, have reported hundreds of ceasefire violations a day. Despite this, many diplomats insist the Minsk agreements are the only way forward to secure peace.
Seems to be kind of off the table now.
Agreements remain the only framework endorsed by this Council in Resolution 2202 for a negotiated peaceful settlement of the conflict in eastern Ukraine.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob
Kiev
to
doesn't
talk you
comply
through
with
all
the Minsk
this.
agreements, refuses to establish
Peritus 100. Thanks for gifting us up. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
a direct dialogue with Donetsk and Luhansk, undermines the agreements to introduce changes in the constitution, the exclusive statute of Donbass, local elections and the amnesty, all key issues of the Minsk agreements.
Regarding the possible recognition of the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics by the Russian Duma, I would like to remind once again of the Ukrainian position, which has never changed. If recognition is approved, Russia will exit the Minsk agreements de facto and according to the law as well, with all the consequences to come.
The Minsk II agreement contains 13 points. 9 are designed to end the armed conflict in Ukraine, while the other 4 address the political impasse between Kiev and the pro-Russia rebels. The agreement calls for the removal of heavy weapons, hostage exchanges, release of political prisoners, and the pullout of all foreign armed groups. It also sets a roadmap for political dialogue. This includes giving the Donetsk and Luhansk regions some devolved powers and holding elections there.
Yeah, just the idea of
But
framing
Russia
everything
wants
as being
special
Russian-backed
status for the regions
separatists is like
before
interesting in
returning
and
the
of
border
itself.
to Kiev's control. Russia maintains it was only a facilitator and not part of the conflict inside Ukraine, so it is not bound by the terms of the agreement. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Moscow, Andrei Kortunov, Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. In Kiev, Mikhailo Vinetsky, Associate Professor of Sociology at National University of Kiev Mohyla Academy. In Istanbul, Matthew Bryza, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and former National Security Council official at the White House.
See, this is what I mean, though, but like,
thanks so much for joining.
When it's like the West, it's Western journalism, you're going to have like a neocon think tank and a liberal think tank. Whereas at least you have a little bit of, you're mixing it up here. Yeah, you have your Atlantic Council ghoul as well, but you're going to have someone at least arguing the opposite point, which is already a big step ahead of like where CNN would go if they were doing this.
Joining us today on Inside Story. Mikhailo, let me start with you. Why haven't the Minsk agreements worked, and what are the problems inherent in them?
Well, there's one very simple thing that is in the Minsk agreements that was agreed to in the first Minsk and the second Minsk, that Russian troops must leave Ukrainian soil. Simple as that. Until such time as Russian troops have not left Ukrainian soil, there is very little to talk about with respect to Minsk. There's a requirement for local elections. There's a requirement for changing the constitution, etc. But none of that can be done until such time as that territory is occupied by Russian forces. And today, to talk about Minsk is quite frankly completely, ludicrous, because we have almost 200,000 troops at our borders expected to be invading the rest of Ukraine anytime soon. So, quite frankly, Minsk is, well, effectively dead, and it was basically killed by the Kremlin by not when it basically, well, decided.
This doughboy refuses to acknowledge that perhaps there may be some Ukrainians among the separatists. It's all Russian-backed Russian troops. Here's something interesting and revealing thing about that, though, which is that this video is like 20 minutes long, Raul. Here's the interesting thing about that. So according to it's been the West's position and the Ukrainian government's position that there's been Russian troops in this area the entire time. That's what they've been saying. That there's been Russian troops the entire time, which is precisely why they can't apparently abide by the dictates of this agreement. So if that's true, if there have indeed, as the West claims, there have been Russian troops in this region since 2014, then what has changed now? What has changed in this current situation? If the troops have already been there this whole time, are they invading right now? Are they invading a place where apparently, according to them, they already are? That's an interesting question, right? Because if that's true, then nothing has actually changed about the makeup of like what is going on here. All that's changed is that the government has officially recognized these places. So if that's your invasion that you've been promising, where they're invading this place where apparently they already are, of course, their recognition of the republics is the provocation. That's right.
Okay. To ignore the basics of the agreement, and that was to withdraw Russian troops.
Andre, by most accounts, the Minsk agreements essentially were dead on arrival. They have not worked. From your perspective, can they be reworked? Can they be modified in a way that the process would work going forward? And if so, how?
Well, I think that realistically, we should probably focus on the so-called military package within the Minsk agreements, which implies the first 3 points of the agreements signed 7 years ago. First of all, stable and verifiable ceasefire. Second, withdrawal of heavy weapons. And third, strengthening OSCE monitoring missions in Donbass. If we're able to comply with the first 3 points of the Minsk agreements, that would already be a very significant progress. Later on, we can move to the political agenda, which will probably have to be modified or updated. But of course, that would require consent of all those who signed the initial agreements.
Matthew, there are a lot of diplomats right now that are saying the Minsk agreements are really the only path forward.
Thank you, Yashbut.
When it comes to trying to de-escalate this crisis. When it comes to the United States, they've had very little involvement in this process. How much can the U.S. get involved now?
Oh, they've had involvement. We can safely disregard every single thing this motherfucker says.
In the Minsk group negotiations, because at least Russia, France, and Germany, who are the ones that kind of, were the leaders along with Ukraine or the participants, they don't want the U.S. to participate. I think Ukraine would love the U.S. to be involved in the negotiations.
It's not involved at all.
There's not a direct role for the United States, but of course,
you can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thanks for all you do for us, Rob HASL.
Thank you, Tyrell. I appreciate that. Thank you for being part of the community. I appreciate you.
United States, first and foremost, by rallying NATO and maintaining its solidarity right now in an attempt to deter.
Obama bragged about the Maidan. You can literally look at footage of like McCain and all these fucking ghouls going to Ukraine following the Maidan protests. They were all about it. It's been like a few $1 billion worth of involvement. Yeah, we're only involved if you count involvement by maybe we're sending billions of dollars of arms and we're training these militia groups. Yeah, well then maybe technically, but other than that, we're not involved at all. Ghouls.
Military force against Ukraine, and it's important to know that this threat by Russia to use force is a negotiating tactic. It may be a genuine threat to re-invade Ukraine as well. But it's a piece of negotiating leverage, a very important piece. The goal, however, of Russia, I think, is not really to get the Minsk agreements finalized. But of course, Russia's objectives, as articulated by President Putin, are much broader than the Minsk agreement, and they all have to do with pushing back NATO into its pre-1997 borders.
Mikhailo, it looked earlier...
Which is reasonable. I'm sorry. Yeah, Putin bad. Okay, Putin bad. That is reasonable. It's reasonable. NATO was not supposed to expand. They made specific promises that NATO was not going to expand. Putin bad. Okay? Before anyone says, yeah, okay, Putin bad. Wanting to push NATO back to its borders in the late 90s, that's a completely reasonable request. Don't make me tap this on. I'll flash it. Just so no one gets confused. I don't want to get anyone confused about this. Very reasonable. It's very reasonable to request that NATO gets pushed back to its previous borders.
Like you wanted to jump in, I'm going to let you do that. But I also want to ask you, are officials in Kiev worried that the West is going to try to use this Russian threat to strong-arm Ukraine into accepting Moscow's version of the Minsk agreements?
Okay, well, I want to say three things, and I'm going to be very brief about them. First of all, people in Ukraine and officials in Ukraine are worried about being invaded. The West at the moment is helping us, and we are very grateful for the military, economic, and political aid.
This motherfucker doesn't sound
being
Ukrainian.
provided. And quite frankly, one of the reasons that Putin has not invaded the country en masse yet has to do with the fact that there is Western support. So,
you know, he said people, and then he corrected himself to officials, by the way. Ukrainian people are worried about being, officials are worried about being invaded.
Quite frankly, we're not concerned about the West somehow leaving us dry with this Minsk agreement. At the end of the day, everybody is working towards avoiding a further invasion. The other thing that I wanted to say was to my American colleague, quite frankly, that the goal of Putin is to try to stop NATO, etc. Putin has made it very clear as to what he wants. The whole NATO thing is, quite frankly, just it's a diversion at the end of the day. Putin wants to control Ukraine. Putin wants to reestablish Greater Russia. He is the gatherer of the Russian lands. This is what he's about.
This came out like
and
2 days ago.
Ukraine is something that is an absolute requirement. Trotsky 100 years ago said that Russia cannot exist without Ukraine. And that is something that has continued to be something that is in the Russian mind and in the Russian elite
this whole NATO thing
agenda for the last 30 years. And quite frankly, now is the time, according to Putin, to try to make that dream a reality. Finally, with respect to the
I think this guy is
agreements,
Canadian. Yeah, I would not be surprised.
These agreements were signed when Putin was holding a gun to Ukraine's head. The first agreement was signed after he was bombarding Mariupol. The second agreement was signed after there were Russian troops on the ground in Ukraine in a place called Debaltsevo. In both cases, the goal was to create a ceasefire. That ceasefire has held, basically, plus or minus, has held for the last 5 or 6 years. There's been a line of contact, and that line
he's
of contact
doing the accent as soon as he says
Putin.
Putin.
Across, shooting on
He sounds like he's from fucking Edmonton.
During the last day,
but
we've had over
Putin.
100 ceasefire violations, and those ceasefire violations have all come from the Russian side. At the end of the day, Ukraine's demand is very simple. Russians, get out of our territory.
Matthew, you were reacting there to some of what Mikhailo was saying. I'm going to let you jump in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I agree with everything that Mikhailo said, and
and it's a good point, Red Scary. Like
focus of what Putin's trying to
Putin
do.
mentioned this in his
But there
speech
is this
yesterday.
broader
He views a lot of this, the Soviets giving away parts of Ukraine to help people achieve this kind of national self-determination. He views that as a big mistake.
Which I think is going to end up being a proposal that's dead on arrival. But as far as Debaltseve goes, that's a very important example. Immediately after Minsk II was signed, the Russians mounted a major assault on Debaltseve in total violation of the first aspect of the second Minsk agreement, which was a ceasefire, as well as the first Minsk agreement, which was a ceasefire. So from the beginning,
Russians get out of our territory, and the ethnic Russians of the Donbass are literally trying to get out of the territory, and they're saying no.
Military forces in Ukraine on its territory.
You're not allowed to leave.
Even if it denies that they're there. It has allowed the illegal
Ukraine says get Russian troops out of the country so we can do ethnic cleansing
to remain in place. Those were supposed to be disbanded, and far from moving heavy military equipment out of Donbass, Russia has massed up to 190,000 troops with heavy equipment near the border. So when Russia demands that Ukraine comes into compliance with the Minsk agreements, well, A, it's not in compliance, and B, if its threat to use military force is supposedly to bring Ukraine into compliance, well, then it doesn't make any sense that Russia
14,000 people killed, 1.5 million displaced.
Why would you threaten to invade a country to enforce an agreement that you claim you're not a party of?
Andre, earlier this month, there were talks between Ukrainian and Russian officials in the Normandy format, but they really failed to make a breakthrough, correct?
That's right. That's right. There was disappointment expressed by Mr. Kozak, who is a special envoy of President Putin. He argued that he failed.
Yeah, well, this is the whole dichotomy, crab babes here.
On the Ukrainian side,
right? When are they going to stop shelling civilian neighborhoods? They haven't been in compliance since day one, and they have this eternal get out of jail free card. They just say like, well, Russian troops are still there, so we don't have to abide by it. That seems to be their position. Yeah, we signed the ceasefire, but as long as Russian troops are there and we say they are, we're going to keep shelling these civilian populations. Because, yeah, we don't recognize that there's any like organic element to this is all. the only people that could possibly be fighting us in this conflict are these Russian-backed insurgents, with giving zero agency to the people there that actually do want to leave.
In terms of the Ukrainian compliance with the Minsk agreements.
And do you think that there will be further talks going forward?
Well, I think that if indeed the diplomatic path is something that they would prefer in the Kremlin, this is the only way to go. It seems that my co-panelists from the United States and Ukraine know much better than I do what Putin really wants and what he's up to. Unfortunately, I don't have such great contacts in the Kremlin to make sure that the invasion is imminent and that it's likely to happen anytime soon. However, I would suggest that it's not really logical for Putin to launch a major military operation in Ukraine. It's a lot that Russia can lose. It's not much that Russia can gain. I think it's in the interests of the Kremlin to preserve the pressure on Ukraine and to insist on the full compliance of the Minsk agreements as they were signed 7 years ago. I think that this is the ultimate goal because the compliance with the Minsk agreements ultimately might set an obstacle, maybe a strategic obstacle on Ukraine joining the NATO alliance. And this is, I think that this is the goal that Putin is trying to accomplish. If he is able to prevent Ukraine joining NATO through other means, then probably he would demonstrate more flexibility on the implications of the Minsk agreements.
Mikhailo, I can see that you want to jump in. Before you do, I just also want to ask you, do you think that there are going to be more Normandy format talks going forward? And even if there were some type of agreement that were reached,
your name's Michael,
do you think
sir.
that President Zelensky would actually be able to push this kind of a deal through parliament in Ukraine?
Look, I want to react first of all to what my colleague, my Russian colleague,
Mikhailo,
said. Very simple.
sir, your name's Michael.
We don't have information as to whether or not there will be an imminent invasion. All we know is that there are 190,000 troops on our borders, and those 190,000 troops are not exactly defensive. Most of them are what's called battalion tactical groups. Those are attack forces, first of all. Second, I read the Kremlin website. I listen to what Putin says. And Putin specifically has said, and the website, if you want to, in July, published his musings on the history of Ukraine and Russia and how we are supposedly one people. He has come out many, many times and said that he does not recognize Ukraine's right to exist as a separate country. I am a Ukrainian. I would like to exist. I believe that leaves us very little room for
negotiation. Are you born in Ukraine, sir?
When someone is invading you and says that you have no right to exist,
Mikhailo,
you are defending yourself.
Are you born?
Saying,
you don't sound very Ukrainian, sir.
What is there to negotiate about? It's very much a to be or not to be type of scenario. There's very little to negotiate. Now, yes,
can we Google this guy?
Interested in having a Normandy format, a U.S. format. President Zelensky has said that he would be very happy to bring in President Erdogan from Turkey into this situation. He has stated yesterday in Munich that he would love to meet with Putin. Putin is not interested in meeting. Putin is interested in destroying. At the end of the day, Ukrainians are preparing to defend themselves. There's very little to talk about at that point when you are at gunpoint. That is the reality at the moment. Kyiv is, I will not say evacuating, but certainly very, very concerned, particularly after President Biden's statement of the fact that Putin has already made his decision. We have seen
hyper-nationalist opinions with zero room for concession.
Troop buildups, and we have listened to what President Putin has to say. And unfortunately, none of that makes us particularly confident in the prospects for peace.
Matthew, what do you think? Do you think there's going to be more of these Normandy format talks going forward? And even if there are, and even if there is some type of agreement that is reached, do you think that it will hold?
This motherfucker is not from Ukraine.
I don't anticipate a Normandy format discussion until the current extreme high level of tension decreases. And what we're seeing right now in eastern Ukraine is exactly what we saw in Georgia in August 2008, when there supposedly were peacekeepers on the ground from Russia, but there were separatists who opened fire on Georgian military positions. This is happening in eastern Ukraine as well right now. The Ukrainian leadership is withholding counterstrikes. The Georgian government
questioning the
did for a while,
legitimacy
but then
of the
it did
historical
retaliate,
revisionist
and that
narratives of the
prompted a
fascist,
full-scale Russian
ultra-nationalist, and the
invasion,
Ukrainian
of Georgia.
national
So I
myth
think this
isn't
is
denying
exactly
your
what
right to
President Putin
exist.
is trying to provoke again. He's talked about a military
I actually do
technological
deny
response
their
if
right to
his
exist,
demands
but
are
you're
not
right.
met, but not an invasion. So what he's going to do is say, well, the Ukrainians fought back. We didn't invade. We were defending. That we were defending against their assault on the separatist troops. So until that clears, until that crisis moment clears, it's an academic exercise to talk about more Normandy format discussions. And again, Russia claims it's not a party to the Minsk agreements. Then why in the world would it threaten an invasion and to kill tens of thousands of people, civilians, for the implementation of an obscure agreement to which it claims it is not a party? It's just the story does not hold together. But before we can get back to Normandy, you got to get past this moment.
Ignore every single thing this guy's saying.
And
This is a
Matthew, I
lying
guess
propagandist
one of the concerns
ghoul.
would be that President Putin is using.
Since moving to Ukraine in 2003, Mikhailo has also been active in consulting several Ukrainian companies on organizational and management issues, particularly as related to sales management. Mihailo's consulting clients include the following Ukrainian companies. Moving to Ukraine in 2003. This guy's lecturing us. This consultant, this Canadian consultant, lecturing everyone about what the Ukrainian nationalists want. Remember that clip remember the clip from Ignatieff's book? These are the Ukrainian nationalists. They're from the diaspora.
1, 2. Audio check 1 2 1 2. 1 2 1 2.
We got Biden coming up in a few minutes. Let's try and finish this. This is still a pretty disappointing clip. Not that informative and still very Western perspective
countries are very worried about, right?
I hope they are. I mean, in a lot of discussions I listen to and have been involved with, I hear Europeans try to hold Ukraine's feet to the fire and say, if you don't implement the Minsk agreements, then suggesting perhaps Russia has a justification to try to force implementation. And that's a total red herring. Moscow does not care about the Minsk agreements. So I hope that throughout the NATO alliance, European leaders do recognize, Mohammed, just what you said, that the Minsk agreement really, again, the focus on it now is a red herring. What Russia is about now is, yes, as Mikhailo said, destabilizing Ukraine, preventing Ukraine from ever joining NATO. And I stand by what I said before, also relitigating the post-Cold War security framework, to which Russia agreed, by the way. It agreed in 1994 in the Budapest Memorandum
at fucking gunpoint
to support Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty if Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons.
After we cooed their government, they agreed with us.
Russia has
it was only after they elected someone else that didn't agree with us that they stopped agreeing.
The fact that the Minsk agreements are not legally binding, how much does that complicate this all?
Well, I think that it might open various avenues for the Russian leadership.
Also said agreement included NATO
instance,
not moving
given
east,
the
which it did do.
I do not exclude a diplomatic recognition of the breakaway republics by Russia. And that would be, of course, a game changer. That would indeed make the situation in East Ukraine somewhat similar to what happened in Georgia back in 2008. And then I think the Minsk agreements will collapse. I don't think that the probability is very high,
that's where we are
but
now.
I do not exclude that because, in my view, the State Duma would have never advanced such an idea if they had not received a nod from the Kremlin. So right now, I think this is probably a more likely challenge to the Minsk agreements than an invasion of Russia across the border with Ukraine. At least that's how I see the situation today. And for me, the most immediate task is to preserve the Minsk agreements, to avoid a diplomatic recognition of the breakaway republics, and to get back to the negotiating table.
This is bullshit narrative that the West has done nothing and has no role in the escalation, that it's just Russia acting on its own is so enraging. How are people so blind and easily misled? Yeah, I was hoping this was going to be a bit more even-handed, like they've at least got someone Russian on the panel to slightly push back on this, but overall, this clip has just been just just hammering home that very Western-centric viewpoint that the United States has had no role in this whatsoever. They had no role in creating this conflict in the first place. They've had no role in escalating it. Everything, Russia bad, Putin bad. It's all their fault. That's the predominant viewpoint of this narrative, even if they do have someone to lightly push back on it.
I don't think that we have other plausible options to reach any progress in de-escalating the situation.
Mihailo, I'm curious to get your perspective on one thing. Most people say
your name's
that
Michael,
the Minsk
sir.
agreements have essentially been a failure from the outset. Have there been any successes that have come from them?
Like Christia.
Well,
She's not born. She took that name.
To push through Parliament.
She wanted her name to sound more Ukrainian. Her name is Christine.
Those failed. But we do have one of the requirements, political requirements of the Minsk Agreement was to provide
maybe we can actually talk to someone from Donbass on the line. This motherfucker's Mike from Edmonton.
Those areas that are currently occupied but one of the presumptions of that law for it to go forward was for the occupation to end.
I think like sometimes when you watch these kind of very biased clips, it still is very revealing.
You can count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
It's still really, really revealing. Comrade Social Distancing, thanks for gifting 2 subs. Thank you so much, Comrade Social Distancing. 3 subs for a grand total of 499 gifted subs. Thank you so much, Comrade Social Distancing. It is really revealing, though, right? When you see like who these Ukrainian nationalists are, they're not people. I mean, I'm sure there are people from Ukraine that have these nationalistic leanings, obviously, but predominantly, though, we hear they're from the diaspora. They're from Canada. They're from elsewhere. We got Mike from Edmonton going, "Oh, I'm Mihailu, and I'm going to tell you what Ukrainians want." That's very revealing for what this Ukrainian national project all about. Completely fake. Completely invented by the West.
Russian troops
very
leave,
revealing.
And then these areas become integrated into the rest of Ukraine as autonomous regions with their own police forces, with their own judiciary. In other words,
zero mention of the whole fascist militia element, by the way, through this whole segment.
However, at the end of the day, the military requirements of a full ceasefire and a withdrawal.
Zero mention of Azov Battalion or any of these folks.
What we're seeing now is a further escalation.
It is real Zionist vibes. It's Zionist vibes, and it's Gusano vibes. There are these Ukrainian Canadians like Mihailu here. There are Gusanos. Okay, and when we want to hear about what Ukrainians want, they're the first person we contact. We contact the Ukrainian diaspora, the Ukrainian Gusanos, the Gusanskis. That's what it is, and those are the only people we want to hear from in these moments. Imperialist code switching is always extremely funny. It sounds like a speech impediment. It is funny, yeah. Mihailu, give me a fucking break, Michael.
Russian forces onto Ukraine's territorial integrity. I do want to say that, we're all hoping for peace. We're all hoping for some sort of a resolution to this. But
it doesn't sound like you
are. When President Biden comes out and says that the decision has been made and that Putin has made his decision, and the U.S. intelligence says that the decision to move in by Russian forces has been made, that makes it very, very difficult to even dream about any kind of a peaceful solution. At the moment, we're looking for de-escalation.
Mihailo, you mentioned the hope for a peaceful solution. If there is a peaceful resolution to all that's going on right now, would there be any appetite in Ukraine for a Minsk-based settlement?
Look, I'm not sure that it needs to be Minsk-based.
And of course, this guy gets the vast majority of time.
City, if you like. But the reality
you have this Ukrainian Gusano, you've got an Atlantic Council goal, and you have like a moderate Russian guy. And this guy gets the vast majority of the time.
Also, de-escalation on our borders. We are not interested in having Russian troops amass on our borders constantly. Secondly, the Donbass crisis and the fact that there is an occupation in eastern Ukraine should not be separated from the fact that there is an illegal annexation of Crimea that has happened. And
Mike.
Crimea has officially been now supposedly transferred to the Russian Federation. Well, that's problematic as well. So Russia has taken over 7% of our territory.
Give me a break, sir.
And continues to be
Come on, Mike.
to take more. So looking at peaceful solutions, of course. But at the end of the day, I think Ukrainians understand today that the existential threat that Russia presents to Ukraine is
So,
long-term.
like, if you're living in Donbass and you've got the Azov battalion shelling civilians there and you're fighting literal actual neo-Nazi fascists, is that a threat to them at all? Is the troop buildup of neo-Nazi battalions on their borders, is that a threat to them at all? Completely not mentioned in this. Not mentioned in this. Not one word about this has been mentioned. The illegal annexation of Crimea. Fucking cry about it, Mike. It's time to move on, Mike. Why do people give... It's a good question. Why do they keep bringing up Crimea? It's a great question. We only want to hear from fucking diaspora. Someone said diasporoid a few minutes ago and it stuck in my head. I try not to do the oid thing. I find it's like I try to avoid that. Avoid the noid. But it's always, again, we always want to hear from these diaspora people about what the illegal annexation of Crimea and what Ukrainians want. Why don't you have someone from Donbass to come on and explain this stuff? Why don't you have someone from Crimea come on? Instead, we hear from Mike here. If Putin thinks he's just going to walk across Europe, wait till he runs into bunker-fied Albania. Won't he have egg on his face? That's right. Crimea River, Mike. Oh my gosh, Paradis. That's just outrageous. Outrageous zingers here. My goodness.
And we will have to deal with that long term. It's not something that's going to go away tomorrow for as long as the Putin regime remains in the Kremlin.
All right, well, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave our conversation there. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Andrei Kortunov, Mikhailo Vinetsky, and Matthew Bryza. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website.
Yeah, I don't think that was a very good segment. Not really what I was looking for, but I think it was revealing, though. It was revealing when you hear these perspectives and like why some people are lifted up in these perspectives and why some people are completely shut out of these conversations. Mike. Come on, sir. I would like to watch, like, I can see, frankly, I would like to watch something from RT on this, if RT has some analysis of this. And you can accuse me of doing Russian propaganda, you can. But again, I would like to hear at least what their perspective is as being explained in their state media. We know what the American perspective is. Can't pretend that's completely unbiased. I would like to hear something from RT that has just the specific Russian perspective on this. I mean, there's this too. While we wait for fucking Grandpa Joe to finally change his diaper and get out there. This is not in English.
Какие эмоции?
Их просто не передать словами, эти эмоции. Вот честно, не передать. Очень благодарны, очень. Спасибо вам огромное, Россия, за все, что мы считали, что мы Россия.
Look at these devious Russian agents.
Их просто не передать словами, эти эмоции. Вот честно, не передать.
Очень благодарны, очень.
Спасибо вам огромное, Россия, за все, что вы для нас сделали. Мы безумно рады, что вы нас
Look at these evil people from Donbass, obviously paid by the Kremlin. That's how they get you.
Хочется кричать. Да, салюты хочется, что нас признали, и мы с вами.
Oh, they're not from Canada? How can we even be sure they're Ukrainian? That's right.
На данный момент находятся в Донецке.
находятся там, и мы очень благодарны им, что они защищают нашу. Нет слов пока на данный момент.
Вы уже позвонили кому-нибудь из близких своих?
Да, мы звонили мужьям. Счастье просто переполняет. Они не видели прямой трансляции признания, потому что они сейчас на службе.
А какая реакция их была вообще?
Им реакция. Стоять на своих постах.
It's a translation bot that makes them seem pro-Russian. That's it.
Что это случилось, что они вам ответили?
Реакция была очень громкая, потому что они этого всего не видели.
Была у нас.
Но громче была у нас,
да. Которой мы выехали из Донецка, да, мы находимся.
Like maybe we can talk to some of these average people that live there that are like, thank you. Just to get that perspective out there, right? Just to get their perspective, mix it in with the constant stream of Western perspective that we get, or the perspective of like diaspora folks like Mike there that we heard from, the real Ukrainians, Mike from Edmonton. They're the only Ukrainians we can ever talk to about this. Look, I think this, okay, look again. Accuse me of being a Russian propagandist if you want, okay? These perspectives we do not see these perspectives in the West. We don't see this on CNN. We don't see it on MSNBC. We don't see it on Al Jazeera. We don't see it on the BBC. We don't see it on the CBC. We do not see this at all. So you can accuse me of being a Russian propagandist or pro-Putin or whatever, even though it very clearly says at the top there, Putin bad. It very clearly says this. I think it's important to watch this, though, regardless of the source, because unfortunately, because in our fake media, our fake free press that we have is not ever going to show this perspective, even if it's like a very important part of this story. We have to go to RT to look at this. It's the only place we can. It's the only place we can ever see it. Okay, so accuse me of that all you want. Yeah, we're too busy covering the Azov Battalion grandma. Yeah, and hearing from fucking Mike from Edmonton about what Ukrainians want. Here's DPR and LPR residents react to Russia recognizing their independence. And we can maybe take a look at this and wonder for these people if this is a horrible act of hostility and aggression. I wouldn't have to go to RT if we had media in this country that actually devoted time and energy to covering this properly.
At least there will be some kind of order. They will stop bombing us and people will finally start living. We waited for 8 years. I hope everything will be fine.
I'm happy. I'm happy first of all that our people will stop dying. I feel pity for our people. They are hardworking, they're the best of all. Russia should have recognized us earlier. It's difficult to say what will change. We waited for so long. Let's see how it's going to be.
I think nothing will change.
Look at these devious Russian agents. Very scary. This is Russian disinformation. They're all crisis actors. In the Donetsk Republic. Yeah, again, this is like coming from what the West claims is Ukraine. Evil crisis babushkas, that's right. Stop my people from dying. A humble request. They're wearing masks to conceal the identities.
Leaders have grown insolent.
We waited for so long. There's a feeling that the wish has finally become true. Many people who live abroad have asked me what's going to happen next. We'll see. They also ask whether Donbass has become a part of Russia. It's not Russia yet. It depends on what citizens will decide.
Yet.
In terms of changes, we're waiting for the Russian spring. Calm, bloodless, when we'll finally be able to breathe freely and see a peaceful sky over our heads.
I'm Russian. I arrived in Luhansk during Soviet times. My parents are Russian too.
I'm really happy we were recognized. We waited for so long, and thank God, it happened. Thanks to Russia, and thanks to Vladimir Putin.
With the voice is kind of funny. Yeah, these people aren't from Edmonton, so they're clearly the fake kind of Ukrainian. The Soviet legacy has crushed their national spirit. That's right.
We're very happy. Finally we are recognized. This is the new page in our history.
All these 8 years we've been here. Never left the city. We were shelled and bombed. We've got through all this hell and horror.
These evil babushkas. How dare they say these things? If anything, and this is how I feel, Scumlord, if anything, RT is useful just as a different point of view. They actually publish some good articles that Western publishers refuse to. It's just bad to get your news exclusively from them. Yeah, and I agree with that. Like I said, if you want to get information about Russia or China, as another example, you can't just rely on Western media sources. Because it's always going to be 100% presented with that Western perspective, that pro-Western slant. I wouldn't have to go to RT if CNN said like, well, Russia bad, Putin bad, everything's bad and aggressive. But because we're journalists, let's also take a look at some of the people that actually live in this region and talk to them and see how they're feeling, just to have some sort of semblance of impartiality or balance on that, which they do not do. This is the only place that we can get this kind of viewpoint. Some even sounded critical of Putin. Like he hasn't done enough in their eyes and should have done this sooner. I bet Putin took them out for that. Yeah, I'm sure there's people that are here that have been part of this struggle that are like, what, like, why now? It's been almost 10 years. While it's framed in the West as this horrible, hostile act.
Of course we're glad that the Republic has been recognized. We all were watching the TV breathlessly. I want the Republic to be calm in the future. So no one has to flee, so our children could grow up.
I'm happy, of course. We are fed up. For years we have been running from the basement upstairs and then back. I don't have strength left, don't have strength. They have been shooting yesterday. The recent night has been calm. God bless, it has been calm. Thank God the agreement was signed. However, Zelensky said he doesn't care. I'm wondering why that hasn't happened earlier. We're glad, we won't flee.
Well, no border. I don't agree with the U.S. State Department statements and the warmongering. Also, Russia did a bad thing at the same time. I mean, it does kind of sound like you do agree, though. That's the issue. I mean, and it depends on who you ask. According to these people, the thing that Russia did that was bad was wait 10 years to make this recognition. We'll see how they feel when Putin annexes them. Multiple people there were literally why they want that to happen. They're wondering why it hasn't happened yet. Still no Biden. Pretty interesting. Again, I think it would be very worthwhile if we had a so-called free press in the West. We would get these kind of perspectives in our free press because they're supposed to be impartial. Unfortunately, they don't do that, so we do have to go to these sources to get these perspectives. Literally, like they're literally Russian. Trying to learn and take all this in, it's a lot. It is a lot, I know. And this is the basic request that I ask of people, is that, like, let's not just uncritically believe every single thing we hear in Western media. That's the basic request. It doesn't mean that we need to immediately, start just getting everything from fucking Russian state media or Chinese state media, but we cannot solely rely on Western media to inform us about these events. Everything that we hear in Western media, no matter how much people that fetishize Western liberal democracy,
you're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Love to brag about our free press. These Western media outlets are always 100% of the time going to be presenting the pro-Western perspective, and will be denying any viewpoint, any nuance, any effort at being impartial. It's always going to be that specific pro-Western perspective. This is the basic ask that I ask from people. This is what I try to bring when I do this show, is let's at least at the very minimum question, ask critical questions about these things, and don't solely rely on Western media to inform ourselves about what's going on here. And thank you very much, G Cluppy. Thank you, G Cluppy, for the gifted sub. To Bleachy Gal, good timing. After that little rant, here's Grandpa Joe Biden to give us his perspective on this.
Well, good afternoon. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin recognized 2 regions of Ukraine as independent states. And he bizarrely asserted that these regions are no longer part of Ukraine and their sovereign territory. To put it simply, Russia just announced that it is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine.
You've just
Last
become an
night,
elite
Putin
member
authorized
of
Russian
the friendship
forces to deploy
triangle.
into these regions.
He recognizes
Today, he
independent.
asserted that these regions are actually extend deeper than the 2.
And keep this in mind when with the video that we just saw about the actual people that live there.
Under the jurisdiction of the Ukraine government.
Paratus, thank you so
Setting
much
up a
for the 5
rationale
gifted
to take
subs.
more
I
territory
really
by
appreciate
force,
it.
in my view. And if we listened to his speech last night, and many of you did, I know, he's setting up a rationale to go much further. This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, here it is now.
as
It's
he
still
indicated
on
and asked permission
any
to
day
be able
now.
to do from his Duma. So let's begin to. I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014. And if Russia goes further with this invasion, we stand prepared to go further as with sanctions. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belongs to
The United States would never do that.
This is a flagrant violation of international law. And
Again,
demands
completely
a firm
disregarding the people that
response
live
from the
there.
international community. Over the last
Zero
2 months,
effort
we've coordinated
to
closely
incorporate
with our
what the
NATO
people that have been
allies
actually
in
living in
Europe
these places want.
and around the world to prepare that response. We've said all along, and I've told Putin to his face more than a month ago, that we would act together. And the moment Russia moved against Ukraine, Russia has now undeniably moved against Ukraine by declaring these independent states. So today, I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions to impose costs on Russia in response to their actions yesterday.
This is really enlightening
These
given
have
what
been
we just
closely
watched, the video that we
coordinated
just
with our allies
watched.
and partners, and will continue to escalate sanctions if Russia escalates. We're implementing full blocking sanctions on 2 large Russian financial institutions, VEB and their military bank.
The clips of the people in celebration we showed before were people from these disputed territories, which Putin just recognized as being independent republics. Those are the people that live in those
Can
places.
no longer raise money from the West and cannot trade in its new debt on our markets or European markets either. Starting tomorrow and continuing in the days ahead, we'll also impose sanctions on Russia's elites and their family members. They share in the corrupt gains of the Kremlin policies and should share in the pain as well. And because of Russia's actions, we've worked with Germany to ensure Nord Stream 2 will not, as I promised, will not move forward. As Russia contemplates its next move, we have our next move prepared as well. Russia will pay an even steeper price if it continues its aggression, including additional sanctions. The United States will continue to provide defensive assistance to Ukraine in the meantime.
Yeah, no shit.
And will continue to
And that doesn't
reinforce
count
and
as the
reassure
provocation.
our
That doesn't
NATO
count as the
allies.
aggression.
Today, in response to Russia's admission that it will not withdraw its forces from Belarus, I have authorized additional movements of U.S. forces and equipment already stationed in Europe to strengthen our Baltic allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Let me be clear. These are totally defensive moves on our part.
This
We have
motherfucker.
no intention of fighting Russia. We want to send
We're
an
always
unmistakable
defensive.
message
They're always offensive.
that the United States, together with our allies, will defend every inch of NATO territory and abide by the commitments we made.
Defensively funding the Nazis that want to do ethnic
that
cleansing.
Russia is poised to go much further in launching a massive military attack against Ukraine. Hope I'm wrong about that. Hope we're wrong about that. But Russia has only escalated its threat against the rest of Ukrainian territory, including major cities and including the capital city of Kyiv. There are still well over 150,000 Russian troops surrounding Ukraine. And as I said, Russian forces remain positioned in Belarus to attack Ukraine from the north, including warplanes and offensive missile systems. Russia's moved troops
this old
closer
motherfucker.
to Ukraine's border with Russia. Russia's naval vessels are maneuvering in the Black Sea to Ukraine's south, including amphibious assault ships, missile cruisers, and submarines. Russia's moved supplies of blood and medical equipment into position on their border. You don't need blood unless you plan on starting a war. Over the last few days, we've seen much of the playbook that Secretary Blinken laid out last week in the United Nations Security Council come to pass. A major increase in military provocations and false flag events along the line of contact in the Donbass. Dramatically staged, conveniently on-camera meeting of Putin's Security Council to grandstand for the Russian public. And now, political provocation of recognizing sovereign Ukrainian territory as so-called independent republics in clear violation, again, of international law. President Putin has sought authorization from the Russian parliament to use military force
Russian trucks full of blood to feed their
territory.
Cossack vampire
And
battalion.
This set the stage for further pretexts of further provocations by Russia to try to justify further military action. None of us should be fooled. None of us will be fooled. There is no justification. Further Russian assault in Ukraine remains a severe threat in the days ahead. And if Russia proceeds, it is Russia and Russia alone that bears the responsibility. As we respond, my administration is using every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers from rising prices at the pump. As I said last week, defending freedom will have cost for us as well and here at home. We need to be honest about it.
It has nothing to do with anyone in the fucking United States of America.
But as we do this, I'm going to take robust action to make sure the
Zero.
pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours. We're closely monitoring energy supplies.
He can barely talk, this guy.
We're executing a plan in coordination with major oil-producing consumers and producers toward a collective investment to secure stability in global energy supplies. This will blunt gas prices. I want to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. In the last few days, I've been in constant contact with European leaders, including with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Vice President Harris met in person with the leaders in Germany over the weekend at the Munich conference, including President Zelensky. At every step, we have shown the United States and our allies and partners are working in unison, which he hasn't been counting on, Mr. Putin. We're united in our support of Ukraine. We are united in our opposition to Russian aggression.
This motherfucker.
We're united in our resolve to defend our NATO alliance. And we're united in our understanding of the urgency and seriousness of the threat Russia is making to global peace and stability. Yesterday, the world heard clearly the full extent of Vladimir Putin's twisted rewrite of history, going back more than a century, as he waxed eloquently, noting that, well, I'm not going to go into it, but nothing in Putin's lengthy remarks indicate any interest in pursuing real dialogue.
You don't even remember what it was, you old motherfucker.
2022.
The only historical revision that took place was going after our boy Lenin, though.
He indirectly threatened territory formerly held by Russia, including nations that today are thriving democracies and members of NATO. He explicitly threatened war unless his extreme demands were met. And there is no question that Russia is the aggressor. So we're clear-eyed about the challenges we're facing.
They're the aggressor, while the United States and Canada have been arming and funding these militias to fight this civil war now for 10 fucking years. The aggressor.
Move as suggested.
Russia's the only aggressor.
Allies and partners remain open to diplomacy if it is serious. When all is said and done, we're going to judge Russia by its actions, not its words. And whatever Russia does next, We're ready to respond with unity, clarity, and conviction. We'll probably have more to say about this as it moves on. I'm hoping diplomacy is still available. Thank you all very much.
So, folks.
Are you still open to meeting with Vladimir Putin, sir?
Remember the map, okay? Remember the map. Remember the clips that we just watched of the people that live here in this region celebrating. And then think about Joe Biden saying Putin arbitrarily, ridiculously proclaiming these new countries. That is not what happened. The people that live there, they're the ones that proclaimed the independent republics. Putin simply said, okay, fine, it's been 10 years. Diplomacy is getting us nowhere. We recognize them now. That's the only thing that happened. The people that live there, precisely zero to do with Putin. They're the ones that declared these independent republics. And after 10 years, Putin is saying, okay, fine, we recognize them. And then Biden frames this as being this purely arbitrary. It's like the people that live there are like, what? We're just these humble Ukrainians, and now Putin is just arbitrarily deciding that we're part of Russia now. Not remotely accurate. That is not remotely accurate. What do you think about this assessment? There's a certain amount of separatists in the Eastern Territories. That doesn't mean Russia has a right to invade. Also, I want NATO to be removed as an alliance. Also, Russia need a buffer zone between NATO members and themselves. They wanted to annex a separate nation. Crimea would have been fair, though, as they're a majority of Russian people, not these territories. Well, I disagree with your assessment that what we're looking at right now is an invasion. Like I said, like what I just said, Putin didn't declare these places part of Russia. There's people that live there that like actually want that to happen. All he did was recognize these independent republics, which is what people have been fighting for that actually live there. And as this map shows, this is still mostly Russian. It's still predominantly Russian-speaking people. Sincere question. What did the increase of Russian troops on the border have to do with the recognition of their independence? So, Gator, for the last 10 years, since the Maidan situation in 2014, when the West backed a pro-EU, pro-NATO coup, with overtly fascist characteristics in the Ukrainian government, since that time, which is when this conflict really started to heat up, the West has been sending billions of dollars. We've been sending weapons. We've been training militia groups in this region, including overt neo-Nazi militias. So here's the question. Does that count as you have Russia increasing their troops on the border? What are we doing in that case, though? We're pumping arms and billions of dollars and training these militia groups specifically to destabilize Russia by flipping Ukraine into a Western ally that's going to do what the West wants. That's going to be a kind of a Western puppet. So at that point, given all that information, what right does Russia have to respond to that? Whether you like Russia or not, whether you think Putin bad or not, and obviously as the title says, I clearly do. Whether you think Putin bad or not, do they have a right at a certain point when the West is like engaging in this constant process of destabilization and sending arms and billions of dollars and training neo-Nazi militias? Do they have a right to protect themselves from what they see as Western aggression? This is the question. And when you look at this through the lens of Western media, everything is framed as everything we do is defensively, everything that they do is offensive and aggressive. After a certain point, you have to recognize the role that the West has played in increasing tensions in this conflict for very specific geopolitical purposes, and ask yourself, does Russia, no matter what you think about Putin or what you think about Russia, do they have a right to act defensively to what they see as Western hostility and Western aggression? That's the question we should be asking ourselves. This 2-minute video from Brylan Burletic is a good explainer on this.
Ukraine? And the answer is no, you can't invade a country that was already invaded and is currently being occupied. Now, an invasion by any other name is still an invasion. It's the outcome that we're looking at. In 2014, the United States openly admitted that it overthrew the elected government of Ukraine. You had U.S. senators in Kiev on stage with the opposition. You had people like Victoria Nuland admitting that the U.S. pumped over $5 billion into the Ukrainian political system.
Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals.
And articles like this from The Guardian, as far back as 2004,
you could call her influx of money, people, and influence an invasion by any other name. As we would if Russia or China was doing something similar in Mexico or elsewhere. That's what our leaders would certainly call it that. Right? We call it the same thing when Russia spends a few fucking rubles on some like bot farms to send us memes of like Bernie Sanders. We call that like an invasion, while we're fucking sending arms and weapons and funding and training terrorist groups. And we call them they're doing aggressive disinformation warfare, desinformatia, when they spend a few $1,000 on fucking Facebook memes. Like, give me a fucking break, you know?
Were an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections.
Alana, thanks for gifting a sub to Mother Trucker. And Rob, it's almost 11 p.m. here in Moscow. We all need to go to bed, so please end the stream soon. I know it's getting late here in my home in my little cubicle in the bot farm, troll farm in Moscow. Thank you for the reminder. Build democratic skills. They got to grind some democracy levels. That's right.
A sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. And adjectives aside, what they're admitting is that the U.S. was meddling in another nation's elections and overthrowing governments that they didn't like and then replacing them with governments they did like. That's exactly
imperialism,
what they did in Ukraine. In 2014, the U.S. put into power a regime in Kiev that answered to Washington, not the Ukrainian people. Nothing could be more obvious. They have destroyed the economy. They have divided society. And under their leadership, they have hemorrhaged territory. They lost Crimea, and now they're losing the Donbas region. And this is all thanks to the U.S. And the U.S. and its occupation by any other name, but still an occupation of Ukraine. Just because it doesn't superficially tick all the boxes off of an invasion and occupation doesn't mean that it isn't. All you have to do is ask yourself one question. Does the government in Kiev represent the Ukrainian people, or does it represent Washington?
Of course, they represent all the Ukrainian people in fucking Alberta.
Ukraine is occupied, and all Russia can do at this point is help liberate it.
Again, folks, I'll say again, you don't have to like it. You do not have to like it. Let's be honest about what is going on here, though. We can at least, we're adults, right? We're adults. We can be honest with ourselves about what's going on here. It doesn't mean you have to like it, but let's not lie to ourselves. I'm not going to lie to you. You know, we're all adults here, some of us.
According to our information about Ukraine's accession to NATO, the issue is a foregone conclusion. We understand that under such a scenario, the level of the military threat against Russia will multiply. The risk of an attack on our country will increase many times over. Enshrined in US strategic planning documents is the possibility of a preemptive strike against enemy missile systems. And who is that enemy? Russia. In NATO documents, our country is officially declared the main threat to North Atlantic security, and Ukraine would serve as a springboard for a strike. Following the United States' withdrawal from the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Pentagon is openly developing a range of ground-based offensive weapons, including ballistic missiles capable of reaching a distance of up to 5,500 kilometers. If such systems are deployed in Ukraine, they will be able to hit targets anywhere in European Russia, and even across the Ural Mountains. For a Tomahawk missile, the approach time to Moscow would be 35 minutes. Ballistic
Who wants to invade? I mean, is it crazy to not want to have nukes parked on your border? This is kind of the question here. Is it crazy to not want to have nukes and missiles parked directly on your border? I know the United States doesn't like to have nukes and missiles parked on their border. That's the whole Monroe Doctrine. If you move weapons into the Western Hemisphere, that's a big problem for us. This is literally, yeah, that is a good pause face. This is literally them saying, we don't want to have nukes and missiles directly parked on our border. Would appreciate your thoughts on Russia continuously trying to destabilize the U.S. through social media propaganda, impacting an election, and hacking government systems recently in Canada. That's aggression. I mean, the thing is, I've talked about that before, and I don't doubt that Russia and other countries like Iran or China, whoever else, do throw some resources into doing this kind of stuff, destabilization. Frankly, though, that is the exact, like the United States and, well, especially the United States, but, you know, that's what we've done all around the world. We did that in Russia. We engage in that very same behavior. So it's like, yeah, people might not like it that Russia does throw resources into like trying to destabilize us in any way they can by contributing to these social media narratives, but that's called chickens coming home to roost. And as our friend Malcolm X said, when I see chickens coming home to roost, that doesn't make me sad. It always made me glad. So if we don't want other countries to do that to us, we shouldn't do it to them. We've done a lot worse. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. What right do we have to lecture other countries about this? We've literally, as this has been outlined, we literally overthrew the Ukrainian government. Logical fallacy. Oh boy, Impactified. You fucking got me. Thank you, Logic Master. Impactified. Jesus Christ. This isn't Debate Club, okay? Go somewhere else if you want Debate Club. I'm sorry, but I don't have any sympathy. I do not have sympathy when we've engaged in this exact, much worse behavior, significantly worse behavior throughout the world, in Russia itself, in Ukraine, all around the world. So no, I don't have sympathy when these countries say, okay, well, fine, we're going to throw some resources into doing our own little destabilization effort as well. Okay, we asked for it. That's called the chickens coming home to roost. Okay, I don't care. We don't have a right to complain about it.
Missiles from Kharkov could reach us in
just seems like you have an answer for any negative statement towards Russia. Look, did you not see the title?
Look, hypersonic offensive missiles.
Look at the title.
To strike. It's like a knife.
What more do you want from me, sir?
I have no doubt that they want to implement these plans, as they have been doing in all previous years, expanding NATO to the east, moving military infrastructure and equipment towards Russia's borders. They have completely ignored our concerns, protests, and warnings. They simply didn't care and have done whatever they wanted.
Another good pause face. Putin bad. How many more fucking times do I need to say it? Animated title. This stream is primo. We got big time effects going on over here. Okay. This is a big time production values over here on the Rob Rousseau show. Putin is literally Stalin reincarnated. If only. I mean, that's obviously not the case. As we pointed out at the beginning of the stream, Putin, quite literally a anti-communist oligarch who spent a big portion of this speech yesterday talking about how he was criticizing the Bolsheviks and criticizing Lenin for basically creating the Ukraine as part of this project of giving people this national self-determination. So very much not. Yeah, prominent KGB officer who obviously betrayed a lot of the principles that he grew up believing in. Khrushchev lied, people died. And the whole collapse of the Soviet Union can be traced back to Khrushchev's ascension. What do you think is going to happen now, or do you not want to make predictions? I mean, I don't really want to make predictions. Ideally, what I think the West could do is maybe back off, and maybe allow ourselves to imagine that there's people in this region that do, in fact, want to be independent. That's the whole thing that what just happened here, is that Putin recognized these independent republics that they've already proclaimed themselves to be independent. I would like the West to maybe take a moment to imagine the idea that possibly the people that actually live there do want to be independent. Maybe we should be somewhat respectful of that, rather than framing everything as this evil Putin conspiracy. Obviously, as we just saw from Joe Biden, that's not something that is going to be forthcoming anytime soon. And I don't know, with the Nord Stream pipeline project getting suspended, it's going to lead to a lot of downstream consequences for energy prices in Europe. And I don't know, it seems a little bit like this is going to continue to escalate. Which is scary. It's just, we should all be very anxious about that. I think Putin doesn't really care about ideology beyond using it as propaganda. He just wants a strong Russia, whatever it takes. He'll work with anyone. And you know what? Again, I would like to go back to this clip as well. This clip from my talk with friend of the stream, friend of the Rob Rousseau show, Vijay Prashad. And we talked about who Putin is, why Putin has power in the first place. As we've talked about, we have exacerbated this entire situation from moment one, going back to 2014, but you can trace it back a lot further than that to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And again, if you don't like Vladimir Putin, if you're in the West, if you're like a Western liberal that thinks Putin bad, well, we should be looking in the mirror, and asking ourselves what we did to create someone like Putin in the first place. And Vijay Prashad, with typical eloquence, outlined this for us when he appeared on this very program just a few weeks ago.
the United States totally humiliated the Russians. The United after States the collapse of the USSR, totally humiliated the Russians. The Chinese suffered 100 years of humiliation from the 1820s.
Sorry for that little chorus effect. And remember also Anthony Blinken the other day when he was talking about the humiliation of the end of the Soviet Union, being like, "Oh no, we had nothing to do with that. We didn't humiliate the Russians. We tried to help them." Or not Blinken, fucking our friend John Cipher, CIA spook John Cipher. Remember, we didn't humiliate the Russians. We tried to help them. We tried to help the Russians. Well, here's VJ on this subject. And again, if you don't like Putin, as I agree, as you see in the title, Putin bad. Okay, Putin bad. Why does he have power? Why is he there in the first place? Let's let VJ answer that question for us.
The United States totally humiliated the Russians after the collapse of the USSR. Totally humiliated. The Chinese suffered 100 years of humiliation from the 1820s, start of the British period, then the two opium wars and so on, all the way out to the Chinese Revolution. 100 years the Chinese experienced what they call the century of humiliation. Well, the Russians experienced like 20 years of humiliation from 1991 till about roughly, let's say 10 years of humiliation. And along comes Putin. Putin was the creature of that humiliation because he emerges and says, listen, Russian people, we are not going to stand for this anymore. This boozed up puppet Yeltsin does whatever Clinton tells him to do and so on. We're not going to stand for this. We're going to stand upright and we're going to revive first the great Russian empires of Catherine the Great and God knows who else. Then now he's absorbed some parts of the Soviet history and so on. He says, we will be a proud nation. Well, it's exactly what you're saying. He's a creature not of, some ancient culture in Russia, but he's a creature of those 10 years of humiliation. If they hadn't humiliated the Russians so badly, perhaps this idea that you need to have, your pride restored would not have been so important inside Russian politics today. It's what enabled Putin essentially to just wipe out everybody else because he was effective in saying that I am going to restore our standing in the world. Got to understand Russia, that's the generations that are alive now and in positions of power, they don't necessarily remember the Soviet era, but they remember those 10, 12 years between the fall of the USSR and the arrival of Putin on the scene. And that's really key.
So listen, if you don't like Putin, if you're like me and you think Putin bad, look no further than our own governments and our own Western intervention. Once again, the culprit here is Western intervention in the first place. We created this entire conflict. We created it in the early 90s. We created it by backing the coup after the Maidan in 2014. And we're creating it right now. It's not self-hate. Opposes, it's acknowledging reality. It's acknowledging basic reality. That's what I call that. It's not self-hate. It has nothing to do with self-hate. It's literally just acknowledging basic historical reality of what has happened. Right? Is that so much to ask? Is it so much to ask that we just acknowledge basic historical facts? It's not from there's no perspective. Oppose this. There's no perspective. There's what happened, and there's this fake Western lie that we've told ourselves. There's in my perspective, from my perspective, that's not true. It's literally just, there's one history. You don't get to pick and choose. It's not a choose your own adventure. It's not a choose your own adventure novel. There's one history. You have to acknowledge it. That's a little something called historical materialism. Okay? That's a little concept. It's difficult for some people to wrap their minds around. Acknowledging basic historical facts. We try to do that over here, though, rather than inventing this going by this completely invented fictional Western version of history. From my perspective, the Jedi are evil. From my perspective, we helped Russia. Thank you, John Cipher. Yeah, America's always the good guy. History is whatever makes me look good. It's always America. We're the world police. I'm not from the West, but yet if you're not from the West and you're propagating this bullshit Western perspective, that's not so good. That's pretty grim shit, if you ask me. If you're not from the West and you're still propagating this perspective, that fucking sucks, dude. In what? Okay, who dat, not you. I feel like you have like this complete inability to understand sarcasm. Is that possible? It seems like every time I make a hyperbolic or obviously sarcastic statement, you respond as if I'm completely truthful in what I just said. Is that possible? Sometimes I say things while meaning the opposite of the thing that I just said. Okay, it's a little thing called humor. I've been kind of on one today, haven't I, folks? This has been like what? This has been 2.5 hours talking about this now. I do have to go, and I've got a hard cutoff in 30 minutes. We do a little banter. Maxie. Even though that information is correct, it's Russian propaganda. I mean, lol, whatever, Doug, that's exactly what. When people started pointing out the links between Chrystia Freeland's family, her grandfather, Michael Chomiak, who was a fascist collaborator, that was her response. That's Russian propaganda. It's Russian propaganda to point out my fascist grandfather. And that's an essential, integral part of this like fake Ukrainian nationalist project that we're building here.